The throne room of Exathera gleamed with bioluminescent patterns that pulsed across obsidian walls, each ripple of light synchronized with the quantum heartbeat of the planet itself. Queen Zareth stood at the center of the grand chamber, her 7-foot frame draped in ceremonial armor that seemed to absorb the very essence of starlight. Her skin, a deep violet that shifted to indigo under different atmospheric pressures, bore the traditional markings of her lineage. Raised ridges that traced geometric patterns from her temples down to her collarbones, each line a testament to 4,000 years of unbroken rule. The humans had been on Exathera for 3 cycles now, ever since their generation ship had limped into orbit with failing life support systems and a population on the brink of extinction. Zareth had watched the diplomatic feeds with detached curiosity as her council debated whether to offer sanctuary or let nature take its course. The Exatheran people had long since abandoned emotional decision-making in favor of pure logic, their evolution having stripped away what they considered the weakness of sentiment. Yet something about the human broadcasts had compelled her to override her council's recommendation of non-interference. She told herself it was strategic. The humans possessed certain technological innovations that could prove useful, particularly their methods of artificial gravity generation and their surprisingly effective medical techniques. But in the quiet moments between state functions, when she stood alone in her private quarters overlooking the crystalline forests that covered her world, Zareth knew the truth ran deeper than simple strategic advantage. It was the human named Marcus Chen who had changed everything. He had arrived with the first diplomatic delegation, standing barely above 6 feet tall, his frame seemingly fragile compared to the Exatheran physiology. His skin held a warm bronze tone that reminded Zareth of the planet's rare copper deserts, and his eyes, those impossibly expressive human eyes, carried depths of emotion that her people had forgotten existed. He had looked at her not with the calculated assessment of her own courtiers, but with genuine wonder, as though seeing something remarkable rather than merely powerful. The initial negotiations had been tedious affairs, hours of discussing resource allocation and territorial boundaries, the establishment of human settlements in the southern continent where the atmosphere more closely matched their needs. Marcus served as the cultural liaison, tasked with bridging the gap between human emotional communication and Exatheran logical discourse. He had a gift for it, somehow translating the mathematical precision of her people's language into the fluid poetry of human speech and back again without losing essential meaning. But it was during an unexpected crisis that Zareth first glimpsed something beyond professional respect. A seismic event had triggered a cascade failure in one of the human settlement's environmental domes. Marcus had been in the throne room when the alert came through, and Zareth had watched as his face transformed from diplomatic composure to raw fear. Not for himself, he had been perfectly safe in the capital city, but for his people. He had turned to her, this human who should have been groveling for assistance, and instead had spoken with quiet intensity about the children in the settlement, about families who had already lost so much, about the fundamental right of every being to breathe without fear. She had mobilized emergency response teams immediately, something her council later questioned as an inefficient use of resources for a population that had not yet proven its long-term value to Exatheran society. But watching Marcus coordinate rescue efforts, seeing him work alongside her people with sleeves rolled up and hands covered in the red dust of her planet, Zareth had felt something she did not have words for. Her people had abandoned such feelings so long ago that their language no longer contained adequate terminology. The humans would have called it admiration, perhaps even the first stirrings of something deeper. Zareth simply knew that Marcus Chen had become significant in a way that transcended strategic calculations. Over the following cycles, their interactions had multiplied. Marcus requested audiences to discuss cultural integration challenges, and Zareth found herself granting them with increasing frequency. She began to anticipate their meetings, to notice the way his expressions shifted with his thoughts, how his hands moved when he became passionate about a subject, the sound of his laugh when she made what he called a joke, though exatheran humor was apparently quite different from human comedy. Her closest advisor, Ticheran, had been the first to notice the change. The old counselor had served Zaretha's mother and grandmother before her, and his loyalty was beyond question. He had approached her one evening after a particularly long session with the human delegation, his silver eyes reflecting concern. "My queen," he had said in their language's precise tones, "your interaction patterns with the human Marcus Chun deviate significantly from standard diplomatic protocols. The frequency exceeds necessity by 0.73 standard deviations. This inefficiency requires explanation." Zareth had dismissed his concerns with imperial authority, but the observation had unsettled her. She prided herself on perfect logic, on decision-making unclouded by the primitive impulses that governed lesser species. Yet she could not deny that Marcus occupied her thoughts with disproportionate frequency. She found herself wondering what he thought about matters unrelated to diplomacy, curious about his life before the exodus from Earth, interested in the small details of human existence that should have been beneath her notice. The turning point came during the Festival of Convergence, a sacred exatheran ceremony that marked the alignment of their 3 moons. Traditionally, the event was closed to off-worlders, but Marcus had expressed such genuine interest in understanding her culture that Zareth had extended an unprecedented invitation. She had told herself it was another step toward integration, a gesture of goodwill that would facilitate smoother relations between their peoples. The festival took place in the ancient amphitheater carved into the base of Mount Ziachera, where the first exatheran settlements had been established millennia ago. The ceremony involved complex harmonics, with thousands of exatherans creating resonant frequencies that interacted with the planet's magnetic field to produce visible light displays across the sky. It was a demonstration of perfect unity, every individual subsuming their identity into the collective whole. Marcus had watched with barely concealed awe, and during the intermission between movements, he had turned to her with those expressive eyes and said something that would echo in her mind for cycles to come. "It's beautiful, but it's also lonely. All that unity but no individual voices. On Earth, we had a saying, it takes 2 notes to make harmony. You can't harmonize with yourself." The observation had struck her as profoundly wrong and yet somehow deeply true. The exatheran way had brought stability and prosperity for thousands of years, eliminating the chaos that came from individual desire. But Marcus's words planted a seed of doubt, a question she had never thought to ask. What had her people lost in exchange for perfection? After the ceremony, she had walked with him through the crystalline forests, the trees chiming softly as wind passed through their translucent branches. They had talked for hours, or rather Marcus had talked and Zareth had listened, absorbing his descriptions of human art and music, of love and loss, of the messy, beautiful complexity of existence governed by emotion rather than pure reason. "On Earth," Marcus had said, standing beneath a canopy that refracted moonlight into cascading colors, "we had this concept called love. I don't think your language has a direct translation. It's when another person becomes so essential to your existence that their happiness matters more than your own comfort. It's illogical and often painful and absolutely fundamental to what makes us human. We write songs about it, wage wars over it, build our entire society around it in various forms. Such a system seems inefficient," Zareth had replied, but her words lacked conviction. "Emotional attachment creates vulnerability. Decision-making becomes compromised." Marcus had smiled, a sad expression that somehow made his features more appealing. "Maybe, but it also creates meaning. What's the point of existing if you never feel anything profound? If you never connect with another being on a level that transcends logic?" She had not answered because she did not have an answer. But walking back to the palace that night, Zareth had felt something shifting inside her. Ancient pathways in her neural structure awakening after millennia of evolutionary dormancy. She did not yet recognize it as emotion. Her people had been bred beyond such things, but something fundamental was changing. The humans had been on Exathera for 8 cycles when Marcus received the transmission. Zareth had not been present when it arrived, but she saw its effects immediately when he appeared for their scheduled meeting. His usual animated energy had dampened, replaced by a stillness that seemed wrong on him. She had learned to read human expressions well enough by then to recognize grief. "The survey ship reached Earth," he said without preamble. His voice flat in a way that made her internal organs constrict uncomfortably. "Or what's left of it. The atmospheric collapse was more complete than we feared. Nothing survived. Not the gene banks we left behind, not the automated systems, nothing. It's gone. Completely gone." Zareth had experienced loss before. Her mother had died in a terraform accident when Zareth was still young, but the Exatheran way was to process such events logically, to understand that death was merely a transition of matter and energy. But watching Marcus struggle with the knowledge that his entire world, the birthplace of his species, had been reduced to a lifeless rock, she felt that uncomfortable sensation in her chest intensify. "I grieve for your loss," she said, using the formal Exatheran phrase that acknowledged unfortunate circumstances without emotional investment. "Do you?" Marcus looked at her directly, his eyes searching hers. "I don't mean that as an insult. I'm genuinely asking. Do your people actually grieve? Or is it just an intellectual acknowledgement that something bad happened?" The question should have been offensive, a challenge to her culture's fundamental nature. Instead, Zareth found herself considering it honestly. "We understand loss. We recognize its impact on system functionality. But grief as you experience it, the emotional weight, no, we do not carry that burden. It was bred out of us centuries ago as counterproductive to social efficiency." "I'm not sure if that makes you lucky or cursed," Marcus said quietly. Then, in a gesture that would have been unthinkable between an Exatheran queen and any subordinate, he had reached out and touched her hand. The contact had sent a shock through her system, her nervous system lighting up in ways it had never done before. "Thank you for giving us a home," he said. "I know your council still debates our value, questions whether we're worth the resources. But speaking for every human on this planet, thank you for not letting us die out there in the dark." She should have withdrawn her hand. The contact was inappropriate, crossing boundaries that existed for logical reasons. But Zareth found herself not moving, absorbing the warmth of his skin against hers, marveling at how such a simple touch could create such complex cascades in her neural patterns. That night, alone in her chambers, Zareth had accessed the royal archives and searched for information on the Exatheran people before the Great Refinement, before they had engineered emotion out of their species. The historical records were incomplete, many destroyed during the Reformation period as unnecessary relics of a primitive time. But what remained painted a picture of a people not unlike the humans. Passionate, creative, chaotic, alive in ways her current civilization was not. She found poetry from that era, written in an ancient dialect she had to run through translation matrices. The words spoke of longing and desire, of connections between individuals that transcended rational thought. One poem in particular stayed with her, written by a queen from 3,000 years past who had taken a consort against her counsel's wishes. The final lines, roughly translated, read, "Let them call it madness, this need I feel. I would rather burn with wanting than freeze in perfection." The poem had been written shortly before the queen's abdication, a scandal that had contributed to the societal push toward emotional suppression. The queen had abandoned her throne to be with her consort, choosing love over duty. History remembered her as a cautionary tale, an example of how emotion could corrupt even the strongest individuals. Zareth had read that poem 17 times before finally entering sleep mode, and she dreamed, something exatherans rarely did, of crystalline forests and bronze skin and eyes that saw her not as a queen but as something more fundamental. The cycles that followed brought increasing tension. The human settlement had grown substantially, now housing nearly 10,000 individuals across 3 continents. They had proven themselves valuable members of the planetary community, contributing innovations in agriculture and medicine while respecting exatheran customs and laws. But integration remained incomplete, with some factions in both species questioning whether true coexistence was possible. Marcus had become more than a cultural liaison. He served as an unofficial bridge between species, spending equal time in human settlements and exatheran cities, equally comfortable discussing quantum mechanics with her scientists and trading jokes with human engineers. And he spent more time with Zareth, though neither acknowledged that these interactions had transcended diplomatic necessity. They would meet in the evening, after formal court obligations concluded, and walk through the palace gardens where bioluminescent flora created ever-shifting patterns of light. They talked about everything and nothing, philosophy and poetry, the nature of consciousness, the future of both their peoples. Marcus taught her human concepts that had no exatheran equivalent, while she explained the mathematical beauty underlying exatheran society. Charon had confronted her about it more directly after catching them in the garden well past midnight, Marcus laughing at something she had said. Zareth apparently had better comedic instincts than she realized, their shoulders nearly touching as they walked. "This cannot continue, my queen," Tegeron had said once Marcus departed. "The court whispers. The council has noticed. Your attachment to this human exceeds all reasonable bounds. It compromises your authority and threatens the stability you have maintained." "I am not attached," Zareth had replied with imperial coldness. "I am facilitating integration between our species through enhanced interpersonal understanding. My interactions with Marcus Chun serve a strategic purpose." "Then explain the 0.4-second delay in your response patterns when he enters your presence. Explain the 17% increase in your visits to the Human Settlement Coordination Center, always timed to coincide with his presence. Explain why you commissioned that sculpture in the East Garden featuring bronze-toned mineral deposits when such coloration has never appeared in exatheran aesthetic traditions before." Zareth had no logical explanation for these behaviors. She could not admit, even to herself, that she had begun measuring time by Marcus's visits, that his absence created a void she felt physically, that she caught herself making decisions based on what he might think rather than pure strategic calculation. "Your concern is noted and dismissed," she had said with finality. "This conversation is concluded." But Teacheron's warnings proved prescient. At the next council session, the senior members had presented a united front. The humans, they argued, had proven their value and should now be formally incorporated into exatheran society through complete cultural assimilation. This would require the abandonment of human emotional customs in favor of exatheran logical practices. The children especially should be educated in exatheran methods, taught to suppress their emotional natures before such tendencies became ingrained. Furthermore, Marcus Chun specifically had been identified as a destabilizing influence, his emotional communication style running counter to proper social function. The council recommended his reassignment to a remote research station where his talents could be utilized without exposing the general population to his influence. The recommendation was logical, well supported by data, and completely unacceptable to Zareth. She had rejected it immediately, without the careful consideration she typically applied to council suggestions. Marcus Chun serves an essential function as cultural liaison, she had stated. His unique position between our species makes him irreplaceable. Reassignment would damage integration efforts. Then appoint a replacement and train them in his methods. Her chief strategist had countered. One individual cannot be allowed to become essential to state functions. Such dependency creates unacceptable vulnerability. The argument had continued for hours, but Zareth had held firm, using her authority as queen to table the matter indefinitely. But the damage was done. The council's concerns were legitimate from an exatheran perspective, and her inability to address them logically revealed the truth she had been avoiding. She was compromised. Her judgment regarding Marcus was not objective, and worse, she did not care. That realization should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like liberation. She had gone to find Marcus immediately after the council session, locating him in the xenobiology lab where he often worked with exatheran scientists studying earth plant samples the humans had brought with them. He had been examining a seedling under magnification, discussing its cellular structure with a young researcher, when Zareth entered. Her presence immediately silenced the lab. A queen did not typically visit such facilities personally. "Marcus Chen, your presence is required," she had said formally, then spoiled the official tone by adding, "Please." They had walked to her private quarters in silence, something she had never done before with anyone outside her personal guard. The impropriety should have concerned her. It did not. Once inside, with the door sealed and privacy assured, Zareth had struggled to find words. How did one express concepts for which one's language had no terminology? "The council wants to send you away," she finally said. "They believe your influence is counterproductive to social stability. They are not wrong from a logical perspective." Marcus had gone very still. "Are you asking me to leave?" "No." The word came out with more force than intended. "I am informing you of political realities. But I am also—" She paused, searching for the right phrasing. "I am experiencing concerning irregularities in my decision-making processes. My neural patterns have been demonstrating anomalous activity. My priorities have shifted in ways that do not align with optimal governance models." "Zareth," Marcus said gently, using her name rather than title for the first time. "Are you trying to tell me that you have feelings?" The human term felt both inadequate and precisely accurate. "I do not know. My people abandoned such things so long ago that I lack the framework to properly identify or process them. I only know that your presence has become—" She struggled for the right word. "Necessary. Your absence creates dysfunction. Your potential departure triggers response patterns that I can only describe as distress." Marcus had closed the distance between them, stopping just short of touching. "And that scares you. I am Zareth, Queen of Exathera, descendant of a line that has ruled for 4,000 years. I am not supposed to experience fear. I am not supposed to need anything beyond the prosperity of my people. I am not supposed to—" Her voice, always so controlled, had begun to waver. "I do not know how to be what I am becoming." "Human," Marcus had said softly. "You're becoming human. Or rather, you're becoming what your people used to be before they decided emotion was weakness. There's nothing wrong with feeling things, Zareth. It doesn't make you weaker. If anything, it makes you more complete." She had wanted to touch him, to close that final gap and make contact, but centuries of conditioning held her back. "My people will not understand. The council already questions my judgment. If they knew the true nature of my—" She could not finish the sentence. "The true nature of your feelings for me?" Marcus completed gently. "Because I have to tell you, from a human perspective, it's been pretty obvious for a while now. The question is, what do you want to do about it? What did she want?" The question itself was revolutionary. Exatheran queens did not operate based on personal desire. They calculated optimal outcomes and implemented them regardless of preference. But standing there, facing Marcus in the low light of her chambers, Zareth understood that she had moved beyond such pure logic. "I want you to stay," she said. I want things I do not have words for. I want to understand these feelings rather than suppress them. She had finally reached out, her hand trembling slightly as it made contact with his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "I want to know if this feels the same to you as it does to me." Marcus had covered her hand with his own, his warmth seeping into her skin. "It does. God help me, it absolutely does. I've been trying to keep things professional, to respect your position and your culture, but Zareth, you're the most remarkable being I've ever known. Your strength, your intelligence, the way you're wrestling with emotions your entire species has rejected. It's beautiful and terrifying, and I'm completely gone on you." The kiss had been her idea, though she had no experience to guide her. It had been clumsy and uncertain and absolutely perfect, creating cascades of sensation through her nervous system that her physiology had not been designed to process. Every nerve ending seemed to activate simultaneously, and for the first time in her life, Zareth had understood the human concept of transcendence. They had spent the night talking, touching, exploring this connection that defied all logic. Marcus explained human concepts of love and courtship, of relationships that existed outside political necessity. Zareth shared the ancient poetry she had found, the records of her people before the great refinement when they too had built their lives around emotional connection. "I cannot promise this will be simple," Zareth had warned as dawn approached, the first light filtering through the crystalline windows. "My people will not accept it easily. The council will oppose it. There may be political consequences I cannot predict." "I know," Marcus had said, his arm around her shoulders in a gesture that felt completely natural despite having no precedent in Exatheran social interaction. "I'm not asking for easy. I'm just asking for real." They had agreed to proceed carefully, to maintain public discretion while they navigated the political complexities. But emotion, once acknowledged, proved impossible to completely contain. Zareth found her decision-making shifting subtly, considering human welfare with disproportionate weight, seeking Marcus's input on matters that did not technically require his expertise. The court noticed, the council noticed, and the whispers began. The crisis came 3 cycles later during a formal state function celebrating the anniversary of human arrival. Representatives from both species filled the grand throne room, and Marcus stood among the human delegation in formal attire, adapted to Exatheran fashion. Zareth had delivered the ceremonial address, speaking of unity and cooperation, but her eyes kept drifting to Marcus despite her efforts at maintaining proper decorum. After the formal proceedings, as guests mingled and the evening shifted to the social phase, Tehran had approached with several senior council members in tow. Their expressions indicated serious purpose. "My queen, we require your immediate presence in the council chamber," Tehran said formally. "A matter of urgent importance has developed." The phrasing left no room for delay. Zareth had followed, catching Marcus's concerned glance as she passed. In the council chamber, the entire advisory body had been assembled, their faces grave. "We have concluded that the human presence on Exathera represents a fundamental threat to social stability." The chief strategist had begun without preamble. "Specifically, the emotional contamination they bring has begun affecting even our most resistant populations. Analysis shows a 17% increase in irrational decision-making across populations with regular human contact. Most concerning," he had paused meaningfully, "this contamination has reached the highest levels of governance." The accusation had been clear, though unspoken. Zareth had kept her expression neutral despite the discomfort constricting her chest. "Your point being?" she had asked with imperial coldness. "The humans must either fully assimilate to exatheran standards, abandoning their emotional customs entirely, or they must be relocated to a separate planetary body where their influence can be contained. We have prepared transport vessels and identified 3 suitable worlds within acceptable range. The migration can begin within 2 cycles. You propose exiling an entire species because they feel emotions?" Zareth had kept her voice level despite the growing distress. "This violates every principle of the sanctuary we offered them. We offered sanctuary from physical extinction," another council member had countered. "We did not agree to allow cultural contamination that threatens our civilization's foundation. The humans have proven they cannot or will not adapt to our superior methods. Therefore, separation becomes necessary. And if I refuse this recommendation?" The silence that followed held weight. Finally, Aaron had spoken, his voice heavy with regret. "Then we must question whether your judgment remains sound. Whether your attachment to the human Marcus Chen has compromised your ability to rule effectively. Whether, for the good of Exathera, new leadership might be required." The threat had been diplomatically phrased but absolutely clear. Accept the exile of the humans or face challenges to her rule. Perhaps even forced abdication. "You would threaten your queen?" Zareth had said quietly, dangerously. "We would protect our civilization," the chief strategist had replied. "Even from a queen who has forgotten her duty. You have 17 hours to decide. Either announce the human relocation plan, or face a formal vote of no confidence before the full council. Those are your options." They had left her alone in the council chamber, and Zareth had stood there as the magnitude of the situation crashed over her. She could not let the humans be exiled, they had nowhere else to go, and the proposed worlds lacked the resources to support human civilization long-term. It would be a slow death sentence disguised as relocation. But refusing meant losing her throne, and without her protection, the humans would be even more vulnerable to whatever policies her successor might implement. She had trapped herself by allowing feelings to compromise her judgment, exactly as the council feared. Marcus had found her there hours later, having tracked her down through the palace. He took one look at her expression and understood that something terrible had occurred. "Tell me," he said simply. She had explained the ultimatum, watching his face shift from concern to resignation. When she finished, he had been quiet for a long moment. "They're right, you know," he finally said. "Not about emotions being weakness, that's bullshit, but about your position being compromised. This is my fault. I should have kept more distance, should have been more careful about appearances. Now you're paying the price for my selfishness." "This is not your fault," Zareth had said firmly. "I made my choices freely. I regret nothing about what has developed between us. But you're going to lose your throne if you protect us." Marcus had stepped closer. "And maybe that's what needs to happen. Maybe someone else can figure out a solution that doesn't require you to sacrifice everything you are." "There is no solution without you here," she admitted, the words emerging before she could stop them. "I have spent the last hours running calculations, exploring scenarios, seeking logical alternatives. But every pathway leads to the same conclusion. I cannot rule effectively knowing you are gone. My neural patterns have been fundamentally altered by your presence. You have become," she struggled with the terminology, "essential to my function." Marcus had reached for her hand, his touch grounding despite the chaos. "Then maybe we both need to walk away. Maybe there's a life for us somewhere else, away from thrones and councils and expectations. You would give up your people, your role in their future." In a heartbeat if it meant being with you. But, he paused. That's not really the question, is it? The question is whether you can give up yours. Whether you can walk away from 4,000 years of tradition, from responsibility for an entire civilization. Because I won't ask you to make that choice, Zareth. I won't be the reason you abandon who you are. She had no answer. The queen in her said duty came first, that personal desire could never supersede responsibility to the people. But the being she was becoming, the one learning to feel and want and need, could not imagine a future without Marcus in it. They had stood there in silence, holding hands in an empty council chamber, as the hours ticked away toward the deadline. The decision came not through logic but through memory. Zareth had remembered that ancient poem, the queen who had chosen love over duty. History called her a cautionary tale, a failed ruler who let emotion corrupt her judgment. But reading between the lines of those ancient texts, Zareth saw something else. A woman who had looked at the price of perfection and found it too high. I need to address the council, she had finally said. I need to make my position clear before the deadline expires. What are you going to tell them? The truth. All of it. She had looked at Marcus directly. I am going to explain that my feelings for you are not a weakness to be corrected but a strength to be embraced. That emotion does not compromise judgment but enriches it. That a civilization built entirely on logic, with no room for connection or care or love, has lost something fundamental to what makes existence worthwhile. They'll never accept that argument. Probably not. But I will make it anyway. And then I will accept whatever consequences follow. Marcus had pulled her close, and they had stood together drawing strength from contact, preparing for whatever came next. The throne room had been packed for the announcement, every council member present along with representatives from both species. Zareth had taken her position at the center, standing in the place where she had ruled for 23 years, where her mother and grandmother had stood before her. She had begun with the expected formalities, acknowledging the council's concerns and the legitimacy of their fears about social stability. Then she had deviated from the script. I have given extensive consideration to your recommendations regarding human integration and relocation. I have examined the data supporting your concerns. I have calculated probable outcomes under various scenarios. And I have reached a conclusion that defies pure logic but reflects a truth your methodology cannot measure. The room had gone silent, all attention focused on their queen. Our people eliminated emotion millennia ago because we believed it made us weak. We engineered ourselves into pure rationality because we thought logic represented the highest form of consciousness. And in doing so, we created a civilization of remarkable achievement and terrible emptiness. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the assembled exatherans. Such statements bordered on heresy. The humans have reminded me of what we lost. They have shown me that feeling is not weakness but the essence of what makes existence meaningful. And she had paused, knowing the next words would change everything. I have developed feelings that cannot be calculated or suppressed. I have formed an attachment to one human in particular that transcends diplomatic necessity. I have fallen in love with Marcus Chen, and I will not apologize for this or attempt to logic it away. The throne room had erupted into chaos. Council members shouting protests, humans looking shocked, the whole careful structure of state function collapsing into disorder. Through it all, Zareth had kept her eyes on Marcus, drawing strength from his presence. Ticheran had eventually restored order, banging the ceremonial staff until silence returned. When he spoke, his voice held sorrow. My queen, you admit to being compromised by emotion. You confess that your judgment has been altered by attachment to a single individual. You speak of love as though it were an achievement rather than a failure of rational thought. By your own words, you demonstrate why the Council's concerns are valid. How can we trust your governance when you admit to being ruled by feeling rather than logic? It had been the moment of truth, the point where a logical argument might have saved her position. But Zareth had moved beyond logic. You cannot, she had said simply. If you require a ruler who operates purely on calculation, who prioritizes systematic efficiency over all else, then I am no longer qualified. Because I have learned that there are things more important than perfect logic. Connection, care, love. These are not weaknesses. They are what give existence meaning beyond mere survival and reproduction. Then you leave us no choice. The chief strategist had stepped forward. As senior council member, I formally call for a vote of no confidence in Queen Zareth's continued rule. All in favor. Wait. Marcus had moved from his position among the human delegation, walking toward the center of the throne room. Before you vote, there's something you should know. Something that might make this whole debate unnecessary. Human Marcus Chun, this does not concern you, Ticheron had said sharply. Actually, it does. Because I'm the reason your queen is compromised, and I'm not going to let her lose everything because of me. Marcus had reached the center platform, standing beside Zareth. I'm leaving Exathera. The Human Council has been discussing opening new diplomatic relations with the Centauri settlements, and they need a cultural liaison. I volunteered. I'll be gone within the week. The announcement had hit Zareth like a physical blow, her vision momentarily graying. Marcus leaving? Impossible. Unacceptable. Wrong in ways that transcended language. Marcus, what are you doing? She had managed to say. Solving the problem. Without me here, your feelings will fade. You'll return to normal functioning. The council's concerns become moot. He had not looked at her as he spoke, his jaw tight. It's the logical solution. Since when do you care about logic? Since it became necessary to protect you. Finally, he met her eyes. I love you, Zareth. Which is exactly why I can't be the reason you lose your throne. You are meant to rule. You are brilliant at it. And if my presence prevents that, then I need to leave. Zareth had felt something inside her breaking, ancient walls crumbling completely. For 23 years she had ruled with perfect composure, never allowing personal feeling to show publicly, maintaining the dignity expected of her position. But standing there, watching Marcus prepare to walk away forever, something fundamental shifted. She understood then what the humans meant by love. Not the logical concept she had tried to analyze, but the raw, desperate need for another being's presence. The willingness to sacrifice anything, even pride, even dignity, even a throne, to keep them close. The recognition that some connections transcended all reason. No, she said, the word barely audible. Then louder, no. Zareth, this is the only way. I do not accept it. I refuse your solution. She had stepped forward, closing the distance between them. You think I can return to normal functioning without you? You think my feelings will simply fade because you are absent? Marcus, I would rather burn than return to the cold perfection I knew before you. The throne room had gone completely silent, every being present transfixed by the drama unfolding before them. I have been proud my entire existence, Zareth continued, her voice strengthening. I have never shown weakness. I have never asked for anything. I have ruled through authority and strength, always maintaining the dignity of my position. But I am learning that there are things more important than pride. And then, in a movement that sent shockwaves through everyone present, Queen Zareth of Exathera, ruler of a 4,000-year dynasty, dropped to her knees before the entire court. The gasps were immediate and sharp. Exatheran queen did not kneel. The position itself was seen as subordination, a complete abandonment of dignity and authority. No ruler in recorded history had ever knelt before anyone for any reason. Simply was not done. But Zareth remained on her knees, looking up at Marcus with everything she felt visible in her expression. All pretense of emotional control abandoned. "I have never begged before," she said, her voice carrying through the silent throne room. "I have commanded and decreed and judged, but I have never asked for anything as myself rather than as queen. But I am asking now. I am begging. Marcus Chin, do not leave me. Do not go to Centauri or anywhere else. Stay here. Stay with me. Let me figure out how to balance duty and desire, logic and love. Help me become something better than what I was, not just queen, but a complete being capable of both reason and emotion." Marcus had looked stricken, his own emotions clearly warring on his face. "Zareth, you can't. This position, everyone is watching. I do not care who watches. I do not care that I am destroying centuries of protocol. I care only that you understand what you mean to me. That you see I would rather sacrifice my dignity, my throne, everything I have built, than lose you." She had reached for his hands, still kneeling. "I love you. I am still learning what that means, still discovering all the ways this feeling manifests, but I know it with absolute certainty. You have become essential not to my function as a queen but to my existence as a being. Please, do not leave me." The throne room remained frozen, every being present unable to process what they were witnessing. Exatheran Queen, the pinnacle of logical authority, brought to her knees by emotion. It violated every principle their civilization had been built upon. It was unprecedented. It was shocking. It was also undeniably real. Marcus had pulled her to her feet, his own eyes bright with moisture. "You magnificent, terrifying woman. Do you have any idea what you have just done? You have thrown away every advantage, surrendered every bargaining position, admitted weakness before your entire court. They could strip you of authority right now and you would have no logical argument against them." "I know," Zareth said simply, "and I would do it again. I would do worse if necessary, because you are worth more to me than power or position or pride." He had kissed her then, in full view of the assembled court, a gesture of affection that sent ripples of shock through the Exatheran observers. But the humans in the room had begun to react differently. Soft sounds of approval, even scattered applause. They understood what they were witnessing, recognized the significance of a being choosing love over everything else. When they finally separated, Marcus kept his arms around her, speaking softly enough that only she could hear. "I am not worth your throne. Then it is fortunate that I am not offering you a choice in the matter. You are staying. We are staying. Together. And my people will simply have to adapt to having a queen who rules with both her mind and her heart." She had turned to face the council, still standing in Marcus's embrace, no longer caring about proper protocol. "You called for a vote of no confidence. Very well. Let us have it. Judge me not as I was but as I am now. A ruler who has rediscovered emotion without abandoning reason. A queen who believes our people can evolve beyond the limitations we imposed upon ourselves. A leader who is willing to embrace complexity rather than cling to false perfection." Theron had stepped forward, his expression unreadable. The old advisor had served her family for decades, had watched her grow from child to queen. Now he studied her with those silver eyes that had seen generations of rulers come and go. "You knelt," he said quietly. "No queen has knelt since before the Great Refinement. It is said that the last queen to do so was Zarena III, who knelt before her dying consort and swore to end the wars that had claimed his life. She kept that promise, establishing the peace that allowed our civilization to flourish. History remembers her as Tsarina the Wise, greatest of our ancient rulers. I did not know that, Zareth admitted. Few do. We erased much of our emotional history when we chose logic. But some records remain, hidden in the deepest archives, accessible only to the royal family and their most senior advisors. Ticharan paused. I have read those records. I have seen what we were before we became what we are. And I have spent the last cycles watching you rediscover something we thought lost forever. He had turned to address the full council. I am the most senior advisor to the throne. I have served 3 queens, watched them rule with perfect logic and unquestionable authority. And I have seen the results, a civilization that functions flawlessly but creates nothing new, that survives efficiently but never truly lives. Queen Zareth is the first in my long service to show me something different. Not a return to our chaotic past, but a synthesis of our logical present with the emotional wisdom we abandoned. You support her in this madness? The chief strategist had demanded. I support evolution. I support a ruler brave enough to admit that perfection might not be perfect after all. Ticharan had planted his ceremonial staff firmly. And I will oppose any attempt to remove her from the throne. She has shown us something we needed to see, that emotion and reason need not be enemies but can be partners in creating something greater than either alone. Other voices had joined then, the debate reigniting with new energy. But the tone had shifted. Some council members continued to argue for Zaretha's removal, but others began questioning whether their civilization's rejection of emotion had perhaps been too complete, whether something valuable had been lost in pursuit of pure logic. The human representatives had added their perspectives, speaking of Earth's history, of civilizations that had tried to suppress emotion and always failed because feeling was fundamental to consciousness itself. They offered examples of how emotion and logic could coexist, could even enhance each other when properly balanced. The debate continued for hours, but gradually, the balance shifted. Not everyone accepted the new paradigm, but enough did to prevent the vote of no confidence from succeeding. By the time dawn approached, the council had reached a compromise. Zareth would remain as queen, but under modified protocols. She would be allowed to maintain her relationship with Marcus, but must demonstrate that personal feeling did not prevent effective governance. A probationary period would assess her ability to balance emotion and duty. And most significantly, the council would commission a study of pre-refinement Exatheran civilization, examining what had been lost and whether any of it might be worth recovering. The humans would remain on Exathera, but with additional resources devoted to helping Exatherans understand and potentially embrace emotional expression. Cultural exchange programs would be expanded, with volunteers from both species working to bridge the gap between their worldviews. It was not a perfect solution. Many council members remained skeptical. Some of the more conservative Exatherans viewed the whole situation with dismay. But it was progress, a crack in the perfect logical facade that might allow something new to grow. As the meeting finally concluded and the throne room emptied, Zareth and Marcus had stood together in the space where she had knelt just hours before. The enormity of what had happened was beginning to sink in. I destroyed centuries of tradition, Zareth said, not quite believing it herself. You started a revolution, Marcus corrected. You showed your people that feeling is not weakness, that love is not a compromise of judgment but an expansion of it, that a queen can rule with her heart as well as her mind. I knelt before my entire court. I begged. Me. I am supposed to be above such displays. Marcus had turned her to face him, his hands cupping her face gently. You were above them. Now you are real. And that is so much better. She had leaned into his touch, still marveling at how contact could create such cascades of sensation. I do not know how to do this. How to be both queen and, she struggled for the term, partner, girlfriend, love of my life. Marcus suggested with a slight smile. We will figure it out together. That is how relationships work. Trial and error, communication, compromise. It is messy and illogical and absolutely wonderful. My people will be watching every decision I make, looking for evidence that emotion has compromised my judgment. Then show them that emotion enhances judgment. That caring about people makes you a better ruler, not a worse one. That love expands your capacity for wisdom rather than limiting it. Zareth had considered this, running calculations even as she stood in his embrace. It will not be easy. There will be opposition. Some will never accept this change. Nothing worthwhile is ever easy. But I will be here. Every step of the way I will be right here. Marcus had kissed her forehead, a gesture of tenderness that sent warmth through her entire nervous system. You knelt for me. You gave up your pride, risked your throne, exposed your feelings before everyone who matters. Do you have any idea how that felt? Knowing that you cared that much? That I mattered more to you than power or position? How did it feel? Zareth asked, genuinely curious about the human emotional response. Like I was the luckiest being in the universe. Like I had found something I did not even know I was looking for. Like my existence suddenly had a purpose beyond mere survival. He had smiled at her, that expression that never failed to create pleasant sensations in her chest. It felt like love, Zareth, the kind that builds civilizations and inspires poetry and makes people do absolutely illogical things. And it was perfect. They had left the throne room together as the palace began to wake, the start of a new cycle bringing light through the crystalline architecture. Zareth knew challenges lay ahead, knew that rebuilding her people's relationship with emotion would take time and effort, knew that her decision to love Marcus would have consequences she could not fully predict. But walking beside him, their hands intertwined, feeling the warmth of his presence and the rightness of their connection, Zareth understood something that no amount of calculation could have taught her. Some things transcended logic. Some bonds defied pure reason. And some loves were worth any price, even the pride of a queen who had never begged before but had dropped to her knees when faced with the unbearable possibility of loss. In the cycles that followed, Exathera began to change. Slowly at first, with individual Exatherans cautiously exploring emotions they had been taught to suppress. The human presence provided examples and guidance, showing how feeling could coexist with rational thought, how emotion could inform rather than corrupt judgment. Not everyone embraced the transformation, some clung to pure logic as superior, but enough were curious, enough were willing to try that a cultural shift began. Zareth ruled through it all, proving that a queen could love without abandoning duty, could feel without losing effectiveness. She made decisions based on both calculation and care, finding that the combination often produced better outcomes than either approach alone. She was not the perfect logical ruler her ancestors had been. She was something better, she was complete. And beside her always stood Marcus, the human who had awakened something ancient and beautiful in her people, who had loved a queen enough to leave, but had been loved by her enough that she surrendered her pride rather than watch him go. Their story spread through both civilizations, becoming the foundation legend of the new Exathera, the moment when cold perfection gave way to warm reality, when a proud queen knelt and in kneeling showed her people that true strength includes the courage to be vulnerable, to feel, to love without reservation or fear.